Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey there, Rush Nation. How's it going? Here we are. It's Friday. It's time for some starts and sits for the week. I'm going to rattle through who I think are players you should be keeping an eye on, players who I think will be potential pitfalls for you this week, as well as also just thinking about some sort of logical options as well from a streaming perspective. So quite a lot going on in this one. I will try and be as concise as possible with this one. Then we'll do the Fantasy Bible part 2 later. And then also our Patreon cast. So I hope you really enjoyed last night's show. Last night's show was brilliant with Danny. Lots of really insightful tips on how you can churn out wins now and get a plan again to the playoffs. So if you haven't had a chance, please do go and watch that, because there's a lot of really actionable insight in there that's really important to keep an eye on. Let's dig into the start sets. Let's start with quarterback, and Jameis Winston is a really interesting option this week for quarterback. If you've picked him up this week in the Superflex League, or even if you've got him in a 1QB league, he should be someone that should be considered. And the reason for this is that he, as much as we haven't seen much from him, we know what he was in the past, which was he will sling the ball. And in this game in particular, he's going to have to keep any form of pace with the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens have been a really, really good DST. They've been a really good defense, but they've actually given up the most passing yards to quarterbacks this season, and they've given up the third most fantasy points to fantasy QBs so far this season. So this shouldn't be seen as a matchup that's scary for Jameis Winston to play, and especially if you've got some of those players. So, like for me, I'm starting him over Patrick Mahomes. I'm starting him over Aaron Rodgers. I'm starting him over Dak Prescott in some cases as well. So definitely one to be really, really careful of. So he's one I'm definitely pushing as a potential start rate, and one that I'll be looking at. In terms of other quarterbacks this week, I definitely think if you're sort of drawing the line here, I would say that Caleb Williams is someone that you can definitely start. I would say Kirk Cousins is someone that you should start this week. Brock Purdy. But then as you go sort of down the list, probably Tua Tagovailoa is probably one of the last ones to start. Anthony Richardson, I think, is a start this week. And then let's start looking at some sits here. So there's a couple here. Trevor Lawrence is an absolute must sit. He's quarterback 22 in fantasy points per game. Green Bay have actually got a pretty good defense against the against quarterbacks. So they're currently sitting right now as a top 10 in terms of stingiest defense in terms of fantasy points allowed. And some of the teams above them have played a game less. So when you're working out like the average points per game, they're well up there in terms of the stinginess of fantasy points allowed. So 4, 5, they're 8th or 9th, I think, at this point. So they are someone that I would definitely be considering sitting a quarterback against some weeks. They're only giving up sort of 15 points a week. And Trevor Lawrence, as I said, with QB 22, I just don't really fancy him to put in a good performance this week. Another one is Kyler Murray. So the Miami Dolphins are actually number one when it comes to least fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Now, some of this is obviously due to the fact that they haven't been much of an offensive threat themselves, and therefore it is easy to run the football on them. So there is something that you can put in this in terms of the fact they've allowed the fewest amount of passing touchdowns, that they have a pretty low success rate per drop back that they're allowing. But also, Kyler Murray just hasn't been very good. He's 21st in yards per attempt. He's 36 in high accuracy throw rate, and he's 25th in passing yards per game. So he hasn't been good, and that's ultimately something that you need to consider, that he is not a must-start play every week, and actually you will probably need to think about pivoting some weeks as well. So he's another player I would be looking to potentially bench this week as well. Moving on to the wide receivers this week. And obviously, if you've got the big names, you should definitely be playing them. I definitely would be looking at certain players and thinking, opportunity here. So let's start with some that I think are a huge opportunity here. Let's start with Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman, for me, has a real opportunity, as I've just said with James Winston, to garner a lot of targets. Last week, it was his first game as a starter. 23% target share, 36% air yard share, 1.8 yards per route run, and a 31% first read share. All of those are really significant. Then we've just talked about James Winston passing, the passing rate allowed to quarterbacks, and then also the fact that Baltimore ranked dead last in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They're giving up 27 points a game, which is a lot more than any other team in the NFL. So again, you're looking at the options there. It's not going to go to Elijah Moore. It's going to go to Cedric Tillman. It's going to go to Jerry Jeudy. And I actually think there's a bit of rapport there. So when you think about the secondary quarterbacks, you think of Jameis Winston playing on scout team. Effectively, what happens is he'll play with scout team receivers. And so one of those receivers he would have spent quite a bit of time with is Cedric Tillman, because he's not playing with the firsts. So when he's not playing the first, he's not playing with Elijah Moore, he's not playing with Jerry Jeudy. He wasn't playing with Murray Cooper. So he would have spent a lot of time in not just in preseason, but also in the regular season up until now, playing with Cedric Tillman and throwing balls to Cedric Tillman. There'll be a relationship that's been built there. There'll probably be stronger than any other relationship that he has. And so that's why Cedric Tillman is a really good pivot to go to. And someone that, if he's on your waiver wires right now, you should absolutely be adding. He's someone that should be added in a great in great ferocity, and someone that should be added. So he's a player I would definitely be picking up. Another one is Rashad Bateman. I've talked about him quite a lot this season, but he has been really, really good in terms of separation score, as I've already talked about, in route win rate, which again I've talked about. I think I talked about this a week or two ago when I was looking at receiving targets, but in terms of him, he is finding the end zone. He is getting a good number of first reads, and he was someone that in this game can find the end zone, and he is someone that should be considered. So he's someone I would definitely be thinking on the edge of starting this week for sure. He's someone that if you're just desperate for players, then they're ones to definitely consider. Another player I would definitely consider starting this week is Khalil Shakir if he's free. If he's injury free, then he's someone that you can definitely start this week as well. Not to mention the likes of Juwan Jennings. Darnell Mooney should have a really good week as well. And then keep an eye on Jackson Smith-Njigba, because if DK Metcalf can't go, Jackson Smith-Njigba will be the biggest recipient of that. Tyler Lockett has a difficult matchup, so I expect JSN to potentially have a really, really big week. If I'm looking at the sits this week, there are no really bigger names than Devonta Smith. Quentin Johnston have talked about their matchups being particularly awful and really, really bad this week. So they're ones I would definitely be sitting. But I would also sit Deontay Johnson with the move back to Bryce Young. And again, that difficult, challenging matchup as well. That's another player I'd be looking to sit. I would also be looking to sit Marvin Harrison Jr. As well this week. Again, he's got a challenging matchup. And on top of that, he has a really difficult time at the moment. I think I talked about this on one of the shows yesterday, that he has not been putting up those elite numbers and hasn't all season with the exception of one game. So, you need to take away the fact that he's probably not a must start. So then let's look at the running back situations. You could definitely start both Miami running backs. DeAndre Swift has to be started. Brian Robinson has to be started. Austin Eckler's the kind of fringe, and I actually expect Tyler Algier to be a decent fringe play this week, given the fact that the Bucs, as much as they will cap the run, they're so banged up that I actually think Tyler Algier is going to get a good amount of work this week. I also think Sean Tucker, someone should be considered. It doesn't look like Bucky Irving's going to go, so it looks like it's going to be Rachaad White and Sean Tucker. And we've seen Sean Tucker, when he's in that elevated second role, could get a good amount of play in here. So he's definitely one that you'll want to consider this week at running back. It's hard to sit running backs really, but in terms of at the moment, Tyler Goodson should be sat because it looks like that Jonathan Taylor is coming back. I think Bijan Robinson isn't a sit, but he's definitely an arrow down play for me this week. I think really if you've got a healthy running back, they're more than likely going to be your starting lineup. You got the Etienne Bigsby scenario going on. I actually think Bigsby's a sit this week. I wouldn't be playing him. I would be sitting Chase Brown this week. It's definitely not a good matchup against Philly. Ramondre Stevenson's one to watch against the Jets. Antonio Gibson is definitely one you sit against the Jets. Alexander Mattison against the Chiefs is probably another one you can. He's a borderline sit for me, but you'll definitely be sitting. Nick Chubb, I think, is one that you'll probably sit. It doesn't look like the best opportunity for him this week. And then what's going on in New York with Tyron Tracy, Devin Singletary, again, they will be a sit this week as well. Game script and also a great defense against the Steelers to go with. So they're players I would definitely be removing and sitting this week. And just for some context on that, when we look at some of the defenses here, the Kansas City Chiefs are the best defense in football when it comes to fantasy points allowed to running back. A lot of that's game script as well, so you've got to take that with a bit of a pinch of salt. But also the Chargers, the Eagles, and the Steelers are in the top 5, so those teams are talked about where running backs are starting against them. You'll want to be considering fading them where possible, especially where there isn't a really strong volume play to be had there. And lastly, with tight ends, definitely fire up K. Dalton. K. Dalton is definitely the guy this week. He should see increased amount of targets with what's going on there with what's happened to the injuries there to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. So I definitely expect him. But David Njoku is another mass fire up. And I've talked about, again, telling that story when it comes to points allowed in the offense. The Ravens sit in the bottom 7 of fantasy points allowed to tight end. So giving up the 7th most amount. So again, tells a story that David Njoku is an area of target there this week for them as well. Sits, there really aren't too many sits at the tight end position is what it is, but I guess for me, Sam Laporta is a must sit this week, as is Dalton Kincaid. There would be 2 I would be looking to sit. I think Kyle Pitts, this could be a good week for him. Tampa do give up points to tight end, so that's an area you can look at. That's going to do it. Wanted to keep this short and concise this week, and give people just sort of a good amount of action to go through. The other point, the other tight ends I forgot. Mark Andrews definitely sit this week. This is not the week to be playing Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. Definitely sit those. You probably know that already, but that's going to do it. Be back later with the Fantasy Football Bible, so do check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good luck this week, and I look forward to seeing you all on the flip side off the back of some wins in week 8. And don't forget, as always, keep rushing.